Welcome to the Torah podcast for Parshas Noach. Join us as we explore the weekly Parsha, uncovering valuable insights and striving to become the best versions of ourselves through Musar teachings. This week, we are going to explore one of the most famous stories in the Torah, the Tower of Babel, Migdal Babel. But we're going to see it through a lens that might surprise you. This isn't just a story about architectural ambition or linguistic diversity. It is a story about something that affects every single one of our relationships. Gratitude, or more specifically, the lack of it. In Parshas Babel, we encounter the story of Migdal Babel, what we know in English as the Tower of Babel. But there's a particular detail in how the Torah describes this episode that opens us up to an entirely new understanding of what really was happening. The Torah tells us in Perek Yud Aleph Pasuk Hey, Vayired Hashem liros es ha'ir ve'es ha'migdal asher banu b'nei ha'adam. And Hashem descended to see the city and the tower that the sons of man had built. Rashi picks up on something that should make us pause. Why does the Torah specifically mention that the tower was built by the offspring of men, B'nai Adam? Would we really have thought that it was built by the offspring of camels or donkeys? It's obvious that it was built by people. Rashi, however, provides an answer that completely reframes our understanding of this story. The word Adam here does not mean men in the general sense. The pasuk is specifically talking about Adam Harishon. The Torah is emphasizing that this generation was emulating the behavior of their forefather Adam. Think about that for a moment. What behavior of Adam are they emulating? Rashi explains, just as Adam displayed ingratitude by blaming Hashem for giving him his wife. Remember, this is when Adam said, and I'll just say it in English here, the woman who you gave to me to be with me, she gave me from that tree. The builders of Migdal Babel were ungrateful to Hashem, who had saved them from the flood. Now they wanted to fight against him. This is pretty stunning. The Migdal Babel wasn't primarily about pride or power. At its core, it was about ingratitude. Rav Wolbe Zeichel Levracha takes this a step further with a sobering observation. We see from this story the concept of ingratitude was ingrained in mankind since the time of creation itself. This isn't something that developed later on. It has been part of human nature from the very beginning. Why is that? Why is ingratitude so deeply embedded in human psychology? Rav Wolbe provides two reasons for us. First is that people think that they deserve everything, and therefore there is no reason to thank their benefactor for what was given to them. Think about how this develops. A child is born without intelligence, and by the time they are old enough to understand what is happening, they are already used to being healthy, well-fed, dressed, and taken care of. A person is born with a sense of egocentricity that places them at the center of the universe and causes them to believe that everyone around them was placed there to serve them. Have you ever watched a young child? They naturally assume the world revolves around them. And if we're honest with ourselves, don't we all carry some of that into adulthood? We get used to certain comforts, certain services, certain privileges, and we start to see them as our due rather than as gifts. Rav Wolbe then gives the second reason, which is, and this is really more psychologically complex, people dislike the feeling of being indebted to a benefactor. Acknowledging that we have benefited from another person means that we owe this person something in return, and nobody likes to feel indebted. It creates a sense of obligation, of vulnerability, of owing someone something. Therefore, unconsciously, we minimize what others do for us, or we reframe it in ways that reduce our sense of indebtedness. What happens when we live with these attitudes? Rav Wolbe paints a stark picture. When we are trapped in egocentricity, we look at the doctor, the bus driver, and the store owner as people who serve us for no other reason than to make some money. Therefore, we see no reason to thank people for their service. Imagine living in that world. everyone around you is just performing functions for their own benefit. You're entitled to their service. Nothing is a gift. Everything is a transaction. This is a dark, lonely, transactional way to experience life. On the other hand, Rav Wolbe offers us a radically different possibility. It takes a lot of work for a person to free themselves of these attitudes and come to the realization that absolutely nothing, including life itself, can be taken for granted. Someone who comes to this realization lives in a bright and happy world because they perceive everyone around them as a cog in a huge world of kindness. Let me say that again. A huge world of kindness. When you recognize that nothing is owed to you, suddenly everything becomes a gift. The person who serves you coffee has given you something. The driver who gets you safely to your destination has done something for you. The doctor who treats you has benefited you. Even the air you breathe and the sun that rises each morning are gifts. This isn't naive optimism. It's psychological and spiritual reality. When we shift our view from entitlement to gratitude, we transform not just how we see others, but how we experience our entire existence. This brings us back to Migdal Bavel. Why were the builders so ungrateful to Hashem who had saved them from the Mabul? It's because they had fallen into that first trap. They felt entitled. They had survived, so now they could do whatever they wanted. They didn't see their survival as a gift to be grateful for, but as a baseline they deserved. This is the same pattern that plays out in our relationship with Hashem as well. How often do we take for granted the countless brachos in our lives? Our health until we lose it, our family until there is conflict, our financial stability until it's threatened. We treat these fundamental gifts as our baseline rather than as a continuous miracle. The Tower generation's lack of gratitude to Hashem led them to rebel against Hashem. In our own smaller ways, when we lack gratitude to Hashem, we distance ourselves from Hashem. We complain instead of praise. We demand instead of request. We feel resentful instead of appreciative. As always, how do we look at this in a practical light, and how do we break free from this ingrained pattern of ingratitude? The best thing is to start small and specific. This week, let's all try to identify 3 people who do things for us regularly. Maybe a spouse who makes us a coffee. Maybe a colleague who answers our questions. A bus driver who gets you or gets us to where we need to go. Make a point of genuinely thanking them. Let's make a point of genuinely thanking them with eye contact and sincerity. Not just thanks, but thank you for doing this for me. Notice how this changes the interaction. Notice how it changes how you feel. You are beginning to dismantle that egocentric worldview and recognize the web of kindness that actually supports our lives. Rav Wolbe tells us that Hakaras Hatov is a difficult midah to master, but it's worth the investment because it is a key to good interpersonal relationships and a real connection with the Creator. Think about your best relationships. Aren't they characterized by mutual appreciation, by recognition of what each person contributes, by gratitude rather than entitlement? Now, think about the times you felt closest to Hashem. Weren't those moments often filled with gratitude? Maybe it was for a recovery. Maybe it was for a success. Maybe it was for a beautiful moment and for an answered tefillah. Gratitude isn't just good manners. It's the foundation of healthy relationships, both with people and with Hashem. Migdal Bavel represents one path. The path of ingratitude, entitlement, and ultimately rebellion. It's the path that comes naturally to us. We are all born into. However, there's that other path available to us. It is the path of recognizing gifts, appreciating benefactors, and living in what Rav Wolbe calls a bright and happy world, where everyone around us is part of a huge world of kindness. This path requires work. It requires us to constantly battle against our egocentric default settings. But the reward is tremendous. Not just better relationships with others, but a fundamentally transformed experience of life itself. As we read about Migdal Bavel this week, let's see it's not just as ancient history, but as a mirror reflecting our own struggles with gratitude. The Bnei Adam aren't just people of that generation. We are all Adam's descendants, carrying that same tendency toward ingratitude. We can choose differently. We can work to free ourselves from the egocentricity we were born with. We can learn to see the world as it truly is, filled with gifts and kindness at every turn. This week, let's commit to being more grateful to the people around us and to Hashem, who orchestrates it all. Let's notice the small kindnesses. Let's acknowledge the gifts. Let's say thank you and really mean it. Speaking of that, thank you for joining us for this episode of the Musar Torah podcast. Until next time, may we all merit to live in that bright and happy world that comes from genuine Hakaras HaTov. Have a good Shabbos.